Hi guys, I hope you're all doing really well. My name is Sarah and welcome to What the Horror, the channel where we talk about horror movies old and new. Ladies and gents, boys and girls, lovers and romantics, and anti-Valentine's Day people. In today's episode we have a movie comparison where we look at the original and compare it to its remake counterpart. And seeing as how Valentine's Day is just around the corner, just peeping over the horizon there, I thought what a perfect time it would be to look at the 1981 slasher My Bloody Valentine and its 2009 remake My Bloody Valentine 3D. Now, whether you think Valentine's Day is the holiday of love and celebration of all things romantic, or whether you think that Valentine's is merely a corporate money-making farce, these movies have got you covered. You've got romance, a love triangle, sex, violence, gore, and cannibalism. But with these movies being made and set 28 years apart, are there any differences between the two? Well, that's what we're going to look at today. So first we'll compare the stories, looking at the original first and then the remake. Then we'll look at the production information, including box office earnings, censorship, and critic reviews. Then we'll compare the kills, the killer, and the special effects. And then finally, we'll compare our three main leads and the film's ending and subtle theme. Of course, seeing as how we're talking plot points, spoilers will be included for both films, so as always bear that in mind if you haven't seen the film yet. The original My Bloody Valentine opens with two people in mining gear heading down into the mine tunnels. At first it appears like it's two workers, but it's actually two lovers who've nipped off for a little bit of quality time in a dark, dirty and dangerous mine. That's twist number one. Twist number two is that while in most 80s slasher movies, a couple up to shenanigans would be the perfect target for our killer, it turns out that the killer is, dun dun dun, actually one of the lovers. The film moves to text letting us know it's 2 days before Valentine's, and we get to meet some of the men from the local town, Valentine Bluffs. These guys all work down in the mine together, and we discover that there's some friction between two of them, TJ and Axel, as when TJ left town for a while, his ex-girlfriend Sarah, good name, began dating Axel. The lads slap ass in the showers and then they head off to meet their girlfriends, who are currently decorating a union hall in town for the Valentine's Day dance. The first one in 20 years. I just want to take this opportunity to say that I personally adore the aesthetic of these movies. Well, mostly the original. But I always seem to love a small working town setting, like the fishing town of I Know What You Did Last Summer, or the desert town of Tremors, and I enjoy the mining town setting of My Bloody Valentine. But I also love the juxtaposition of the dark, dirty mines full of dark overalls and sharp axes, contrasted with the bright, soft decorations for Valentine's Day, full of pinks, reds, soft hearts, and, floaty crepe paper streamers. We find out a little bit more about one of our three leads, TJ. His dad is the mayor and owns the town's mines, but TJ didn't want that life, so he moved out to the west coast. He didn't make it on his own, so he's back in town and back in the mine and angry about both. After TJ's dad receives a human heart in a candy box, we find out a tragic event in Valentine Bluff's history and why there hasn't been a dance in 20 years. Thanks to the token harbinger of doom, we get the story of Harry Warden. So, 20 years ago, on the 14th of February, the night of the Valentine dance, 5 miners were still down in the mine, but their supervisors left before they were safely out, because they just wanted to get to the party. They also failed to check the methane gas levels, and because of a lantern light there was an explosion and the 5 men were buried. It took them 6 weeks trying to rescue them, and when they finally found the men, only one was alive, having survived by eating the other 4. Harry Warden had had a psychological breakdown and was admitted to a psychiatric hospital, which he escaped from 1 year later on the 14th of February. He returned to town and killed the 2 supervisors, cutting out their hearts and putting them in candy boxes. Harry Warden also left a note saying if there were any more dances, he would return and kill again. Now, 20 years later, the town is putting on a Valentine dance, and so people start getting killed off by someone in a miner's suit. Can't say they weren't warned. And so the mayor and chief of police decide to cancel the dance and take down all of the town's decorations. The young couples are of course disappointed, and they decide to hold their own Valentine's party at the mine. But one by one they start getting killed off and panic ensues when the bodies start being discovered.
Harry Warden, he's here! Everybody get the out, go!
The problem is that a small group of the young adults have gone down to explore the mines, and so while everyone else drives into town to alert the police, TJ and Axel head down into the mine to rescue Sarah and the others. The group in the mine tunnels are stalked by the miner and end up being picked off one by one until there's only TJ and Sarah left. TJ gets into a fight to the death with the miner, only for it to be revealed that it's not Harry Warden, who had actually died 5 years ago, but instead it's Axel. It turns out that one of the supervisors that Harry Warden killed back in 1961 was Axel's dad, and not only that, but Axel was hiding under his dad's bed at the time and saw the whole thing. So Axel is buried under a wall collapse, the rescue team and police arrive, and TJ and Sarah are now safe. But the film doesn't end there, because it turns out that Axel survived with only his arm being pinned under a rock. Axel amputates his own arm and runs off further into the mine, shouting threats that he and Harry Warden will return and kill everyone, and mumbles something about Sarah being his bloody Valentine. The credits roll with the sound of Axel's manic laughs of insanity over the top. Okay, so now let's take a look at the 2009 remake. The remake opens with some exposition flying newspaper articles explaining that there was an explosion at the Hannigan mines, trapping 6 workers. The mine owner's son, Tom, this movie's TJ, confesses that he forgot to bleed the methane lines, which resulted in the explosion. 6 days have gone by with still no rescue of the workers, but finally they find 5 dead bodies and 1 survivor, Harry Warden. On investigation though, the 5 men appear to have been murdered by a pickaxe to the head and not from the explosion. It's believed Harry Warden killed them to, quote, conserve his own goddamn air, end quote. So the remake removes the aspect of cannibalism, and when they find Harry, he's in a coma. The film then starts 1 year after the mine accident, with Harry Warden still in his coma, but some flashbacks and flickering eyelids later, and whoops, Warden's awake, and we cut to the aftermath of a killing spree with bodies ripped in half and hearts torn out. In another part of town, a bunch of teens or 20-somethings are having a party in the mine tunnels, and Tom arrives with his girlfriend Sarah, who join their friend Axel and his girlfriend Irene. What the gang don't know is that Harry Warden is waiting for them down in the tunnels. Sarah, Axel and Irene drive away, leaving Tom behind, and he and Harry Warden get into a fight which heads back into the mine. Harry is about to kill Tom, but is shot by the sheriff, and as Harry collapses onto his knees, he and Tom stare at each other, which will become important later. Harry is shot a few more times and he runs off into the mines, echoing the end scene of the original film. Tom is left in what seems like a state of shock, with his ears ringing and blood on his face. We then jump to 10 years later, where Axel is now the town's sheriff and also married to Sarah, with who he shares a son. But that doesn't stop him from having an affair with what looks like a much younger woman called Megan, and unlike in the original My Bloody Valentine, these two are not practicing safe sex because, oh dear, Megan is pregnant. We also see the return of Tom to town, this time called Harmony, who, like in the original, left town for years, and now, since his dad has passed away, he wants to sell the mines which he inherited. The townsfolk aren't exactly happy about this, seeing as how the mines provide most of the town's jobs and bring in most of the town's money. We then get an unnecessarily long death scene for poor Irene as she is chased while being butt naked by the miner of a hotel. And no, I'm not putting footage of that in. Her body and a couple of others are discovered, and so the investigation begins. Tom also pays his old girlfriend Sarah a visit, but she's married now, so unlike the original, there's no real love triangle there, but there is anger. Sarah is angry that Tom left town 10 years ago, not telling anyone where he went or if he would ever be back. We see more scenes of the townspeople being angry at Tom, and now not only because of his selling the mine, but also because they blame him for all of the murders that have happened. Through his jealousy, Axel believes that Tom is involved with the murders, but we get a scene where Tom comes face to face with Harry Warden, again down in the mines, and as he's locked in a cage, all he can do is stand and watch on as Harry murders a mine worker. So it can't be him, right? Well, maybe not, because it turns out that 10 years ago, a bunch of the town's men went looking for Harry Warden, killed him and buried him in the woods. And this is where the remake differs to the original. The original wasn't really a whodunit. We were genuinely supposed to believe it was Harry Warden until the shock twist reveal at the end. In the remake, during the first 45 minutes, we are, yes, supposed to believe it's Harry Warden, but seeing as how we had the twist in the original, people must be expecting a twist in the remake. And so, after the reveal that Harry Warden is dead, the rest of the movie is spent trying to make us believe the miner is either Tom or Axel, flip-flopping between them. We get a rotation of scenes where Tom brutally shouts he didn't do it, Axel gets angry and jealous, and the miner kills someone. Then, as we head towards the finale, we find out that Tom was in a mental institution for 7 years, and Axel implies that because of this, he's crazy and dangerous. And unfortunately, the film backs this up, because in this twist reveal, it's revealed that the miner is actually Tom and not Axel like in the original. What a twist! We see a montage of flashbacks to Tom digging up Harry Warden's body. We see him seeing Harry Warden in the mirror instead of himself, committing the murders, and locking himself in the cage. But Tom seems as surprised about this reveal as Sarah and Axel are. It turns out that he has no memory of the killings because, second twist alert, it wasn't actually Tom, but Harry Warden who has possessed Tom's body. The film ends with Tom/Harry being caught up in another explosion but surviving long enough to kill a rescue worker and escape the mine in their overalls and mask. And Sarah and Axel are rescued as well, with Sarah telling Axel that she loves the cheating round bastard. The original My Bloody Valentine is a Canadian slasher movie that was released in 1981, and apparently everything from conception to release only took around a year in total. The original is often an overlooked and underrated movie. It was filmed on a budget of $2.3 million and made $5.7 million worldwide. It was not a huge success and received lots of negative reviews from critics because of its violence and gore. It was also criticised for being repulsive and for having a, quote, awkward script. But what a lot of these critics may or may not have known is that to get a theatrical release, the film actually had to have a huge amount of footage cut so that it could get an R rating. The previous year there had been critical backlash over Friday the 13th's violence, and so slasher movies were being rated with a far harsher eye. The remake, My Bloody Valentine, was released in January 2009, kicking off the next 24 months or so of X, Y, and Z in 3D. You know, Saw 3D, The Final Destination, all the classics. It was made on a budget of $14 million and made $100 million at the box office, and again, like the original, was met with pretty mixed reviews. Some praised the production and performances, calling it a mix of old school horror with modern 3D tech, but others called the acting wooden and forgettable. And my, how times have changed, because My Bloody Valentine 3D is R-rated and there is blood, gore, and body parts flying all over the place, so no cuts for the remake. Because the original had so much footage cut, it made the flow of the movie jolting in some scenes as the action juddered forward, and you could also argue that this broke the tense atmosphere and removed some of the threat posed by the miner, who, as a killer, is actually a pretty angry and violent one. I mean, he doesn't just kill, he kills and maims, ripping out hearts, putting bodies in tumble dryers, dragging bodies along the floor by a pickaxe through the head. To this day, the complete uncut version of My Bloody Valentine hasn't been seen or released, but there was some footage added back for the DVD Blu-ray release back in 2009, and then even further footage added for the Scream Factory release, where we get to see the deaths in more detail, such as the mentioned above. With the restored footage, we not only get to experience more of the character of the minor killer, but we also get to see the fantastic practical effects created by Tom Berman, whose credits also include Planet of the Apes, Halloween 3, Teen Wolf, The Goonies, and The X-Files, to name a few. I enjoy the variety of kills in My Bloody Valentine. Unlike some slasher killers who stick to a tried and tested way of killing their victims, the miner actually uses quite a range of weapons, from a pickaxe, a nail gun, a large drill piece, and a noose. We do, of course, have the standard stalks from a distance and then picks them off one by one, but, you know, it is still a slasher film, so some tropes have to be followed. The problem for me with the remake is that even though there's so much more blood and gore and body parts, it's all CGI flying at the screen. Well, actually saying that the dead bodies after the fact look like they're practical, but the kills themselves are all CGI, including horror veteran Tom Atkins' ripped off jaw flying at the screen. We do get some nice nods to the original movie with the recreation of the tumble dryer kill, the pickaxe through the eye, and the hearts then being put in heart-shaped candy boxes. And with the movie having not been hacked to pieces like the original, we get a pretty good depiction of the anger and brutality of this version of the miner. I mean, I wouldn't want to cross paths with him. We also actually get a little bit more of Harry Warden in the remake, and not just as the miner suit, but as Harry Warden. Like I said in the plot of the remake, it's stated that this Harry Warden was always a murderer, not driven to it, and he doesn't resort to cannibalism. And like the original Harry Warden, he does still have a grudge against those responsible, this time Tom Hanniger, and he goes after him just like he went after the supervisors in the original. Okay, so now looking at our three leads. In the original My Bloody Valentine, TJ has a huge chip on his shoulder and pent-up anger at being back in town and at having lost Sarah to Axel. He tends to just stand around glaring and smirking a lot, especially at Sarah and Axel, trying to make them uneasy. And that's about it. That's his story. Well, that and rocking a nifty little neckerchief. Sarah works in the town store with her friends, similar to the remake. In the original, she's just dating Axel. She's not married to him, so her friend Patty teases her about not knowing which guy she wants, as a little bit of a love triangle has started. But Sarah says that both of them are acting like idiots. I have to say that for a slasher set in the 80s, I think that the original version is actually much better in its treatment of the women in it. I mean, yeah, TJ and Axel keep having pissing competitions over Sarah, and they always grab and pull her about, but Sarah does tell them both to get lost and says that she has her own mouth and can speak for herself. The women in this are likeable, and they're not just there to fill a character trope. And with the young couples, the innuendos and sexual behaviour is all in good humour and mutual, and there's even a scene that promotes safe sex. Things are very different in the remake, but we'll get to that. So let's talk about Axel, our third lead and of course our killer. Axel and TJ used to be friends until Axel started dating Sarah after TJ left town. And now that TJ is back, Axel is just a jealous and possessive boyfriend who feels he has the right to give Sarah permission to leave the table at the bar to put music on. But the main thing we should talk about with Axel is how he is the movie's killer. So Axel has trauma and/or PTSD after witnessing his father's murder, but he latches onto the person who caused that trauma, namely Harry Warden. For the original Axel, he seems to be able to separate himself from Harry Warden. He isn't taking on Harry's personality, he's just being a copycat killer. It seems as though Axel murdering people was triggered by the town throwing a Valentine's Day dance, which I imagine was difficult for Axel, seeing as how his father was murdered on the night of the last one. But it could also have been triggered by the return of his old friend TJ, which has then caused friction between him and Sarah. Now look, this isn't the episode to get into the psychology of serial killers, but if you look into them, there is often a recurring theme among a large number of them, and that is that their killings were triggered by a stressful event in their lives, a loss of their job, a divorce. And I haven't seen all of the slashers from the 80s, but from the ones that I have, I do know that it's unusual to have a villain committing their crimes because of their mental health. It's so commonplace nowadays, trauma being the buzzword of the moment, that it's easy to forget that it wasn't always a subject spoken about, acknowledged, or seen in slashers. It's a refreshing and interesting take, and I imagine quite a surprise twist reveal when the film first came out. However, you can't help but wonder why no one ever mentions the fact that Harry Warden killed Axel's father at any point earlier in the film. I mean, they're decorating for the dance. The 20-somethings openly joke and diminish Harry Warden and the murders in front of Axel. And while the concept is interesting, because it's a twist reveal, not much time is actually given to it, and the end scene of Axel creeping off into the mine, mumbling and screaming, isn't the best portrayal of insanity in my opinion. Look, my dad worked in a psychiatric hospital and the lockup wards had many a manic scream coming from them. But for me, this final shot turns Axel into a cartoon and caricature version of someone who is mentally ill, and in doing that, wastes the real potential of the twist. So now let's look at the remake's lead 3 characters, starting with Sarah. She's still the nice girl, the final girl, and still works in the store. This time it's her parents. But I just don't feel as though she's as feisty or independent as the original Sarah. Here, she never really pulls Axel up on his behaviour towards her, which is really bad. But let's also just talk a little bit about the women in this film and how they're portrayed. So we have the wet lettuce Sarah, the young Megan who is just there to have an affair with Axel and get pregnant, and then there's Irene. Irene gets to be treated like garbage by Axel when she's his girlfriend, and then when we meet her 10 years later, she's hooking up with Frank, the truck driver. Frank. Frank is played by the film's writer Todd Farmer, who wrote himself into a sex scene with Betsy Rue. And Frank is a piece of trash. He's married, he films them having sex without her consent, and then throws money at her, calling her a whore. She's then chased butt naked by the miner in the most drawn-out death scene in the film. She spends 6 minutes and 6 seconds of this movie naked. Yeah, I did time it. The remake's Axel is just as jealous and possessive as his original counterpart, but he also has angry outbursts towards Tom, his wife, a news reporter, anyone really. He has zero trust in his wife, and whenever Tom is around, he makes some crack about having sex with Sarah, his wife, which is hilarious considering he's the one having an affair with a much younger woman who he knocked up. And finally, Tom, this movie's TJ and our killer. Tom, like the original's Axel, is clearly suffering with trauma and or PTSD, this time though from feeling responsible for the mine explosion and then for nearly being killed by Harry Warden, who is then shot in front of him, covering his face in Warden's blood. There are multiple moments during the film where we can see that Tom is tortured by the past and struggling to deal with it. We see that he's on prescribed medication and wants to sell his father's mine, a way to cut ties with the town. Unfortunately, the film doesn't really delve any further than that into his struggles, and has him being blamed by the townsfolk for all of the murders, despite it having been Harry Warden. Way to support people in need, Harmony. To be honest, the remake just overall feels very angry and bitter, which means the dark bleakness of the mining town setting is a perfect backdrop, but where the original also had scenes with humour and friendship in it, acting like the Valentine's decorations, creating a little bit of light contrast, the remake has no such scenes. Maybe they're going for a portrayal of a working town, feeling the plights and struggles that relying on your town's industry brings with it. It fails, you fail. But to me, it just feels more like a portrayal of a small town narrow-mindedness. I've already mentioned how I don't like the whole he was in an institute so he's crazy and dangerous angle. I mean, yeah, sure, he is dangerous and he is the killer, but horror all too often portrays someone as a killer or dangerous just because they have mental health issues. But I mean, I need not have words so much, because the end of the film reveals that this is not actually a potential study of mental health like the original, but is actually a possession movie. I suppose they could be implying that Tom is suffering from multiple personality disorder or schizophrenia or something like that, but again, I just don't have enough faith in the film to believe that for sure. Okay, so there you have it, guys, a comparison between My Bloody Valentine 1981 and My Bloody Valentine 2009. I love the original movie and I rewatch it every year in February. I think that it's a well-scripted and well-produced slasher. It utilises the mine setting well and builds a pretty good amount of tension, but unfortunately a lot of that suffers from the cuts to the kill scenes. The remake is also one I rewatch every year, but after I do, I always wonder why I do. Look, it's definitely not the worst remake or reboot ever given to us, and there are some good aspects to it, but I don't like the way the female characters and the concept of mental health is portrayed. Anyway, I hope you guys liked this episode and I hope you all have a wonderful Valentine's Day, whether you're sharing it with your loved ones or just yourself. Let me know in the comments below your thoughts on these movies. Let me know which one you personally prefer and any takes on it. But in the meantime, thank you as always for stopping by. I really do appreciate it. Take care of yourselves and I will talk to you in the next episode. Bye, guys.